Welcome, everyone. If you're just joining our session, we're so glad that you're here. You've arrived at Get Unstuck, talking about ways to move forward as you get uncomfortable and you move towards your next career opportunity. I'm delighted to be here today with Dominic and Catherine, and they have really good content, I will say, or ideas to share with you. But first, I want to do a couple of housekeeping things. If this is your first session at the summit, welcome. We're so glad that you found us. I do want to just do a call out to the right-hand side of your screen. I'll point that way for myself. You should see a couple different options at the top, and the first one on the far left says session. That's where you can communicate with us during the session. And I apologize, I'm Bridget Randall, a volunteer with part of L&D Cares, and really proud to be hosting with you today. So again, if you click up in the upper right and you click on that session, that'll bring you to our session chat. There's also the event right next to it, and that's the entire event chat. So if you want to make a comment there, by all means do it. But if you want to communicate something here specific for this session, then go ahead and use that session chat. Also, just on the next tier down below the session, you'll see another little bar, and the second one says Q&A. So feel free to put any questions and answers there, and I'll be running things from behind scenes to help support Catherine and Dominic and have you guys make the most of this session together today. So without further ado, Dominic and Catherine.
Great, thanks so much, Bridget.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks for that. So I think what we wanted to do was just have a general chit chat about career transitions and thinking more laterally about career options. So Dominic, you run a career transition platform based out of London in the UK. Just tell us a tiny bit about that.
Yeah, that's right, Kat. Hi, everybody. I'm Dom, and as Kat mentioned, I run a tech social enterprise in the UK, and it's all about changing the way that people think about careers. We distribute over half of our profits to support initiatives that are designed to tackle the UN Sustainable Development Goal around decent work. So back in 2016, I started thinking about how work was changing and the pressure being created by the transition to the fourth industrial revolution, which I know everyone's going to be talking about a lot over the course of the next few days. And ultimately, it kind of boiled down to a question, which was, what would the world be like if we made it easier for everyone to realize their potential and thrive in decent work throughout their lives? So we built this digital platform that brings together everything that you need for developing throughout your career, with the goal basically to make personal development joyful and truly lifelong. And we now support over 8,000 people in the UK. So we get to hear a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different contexts of people's lives. And there really are no kind of hard and fast rules. So one of the things that Kat and I are going to talk about today really is just telling some of the stories of people that we've encountered along the way, how people have developed the mindset for thinking forwards in their careers. And hopefully that will give you some inspiration as an L&D job seeker.
Yeah, I think what you've just said there, really, really interesting. I think, we are increasingly hearing an awful lot about the fourth industrial revolution and digital transformation and a very different future of work. We know, because various think tanks have told us, that there's going to be ample jobs. We just don't know what they're going to be yet. And I think that there is this challenge, which we hear the narrative around change, but there's no clear path. There's no clear pathway. It's not as if it's there's a straightforward track from A to B. So for me, when I think about these big kind of paradigm shifts, I think about what we can bring as opposed to what we don't know about. So what, from your perspective, given all the people that you've helped, what do you see as being the most common challenges that people face when they're looking at when they're looking at career change and when they're assessing the potential jobs that they actually are capable of?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of really common threads. Talking about a couple of examples, there's one of our members, Jo. She was working as a performing arts program manager, and then moved into being a web designer. So a really quite far career move from what she was previously doing. And her motivation behind that was really around trying to explore her creativity to the fullest. But that transition didn't start with knowing that's what she was going to do. Actually, it started with not knowing where to start, not knowing what to do next. And really similarly with Abigail, she was a pastry chef and now she works in SEO marketing. So again, a really massive shift in terms of the types of environments being worked in. And now her motivation was really about her mental health and her physical health that was kind of linked to the environment that she was working in. But again, the challenge there was kind of deciding what it is that she wanted to do. So the first kind of key challenge that we see frequently is that question of, I don't know where to start. And, you know, typically the sorts of behaviors that creates really is looking for the same thing. So looking for something that's very close to what you do today, and not necessarily being able to look a little bit further, because it's quite hard, right? You know, how do you search for the name of work that you don't know the name of? And so there's lots of kind of constituent elements there that are really challenging. The second really is about confidence. And this is kind of answering the question of, I can't do it. So everything feeling very difficult and uncertain, and not really being too sure about what it is you're going to do to be able to get there. And then, you know, in the last example with Jennifer, you know, she was working as a City of London personal assistant, and then she transitioned to being a veterinary nurse. Now, interestingly, in this instance, in this context, she had a good feeling of wanting to get out of what she'd fallen into a job as she'd moved to London, and she needed to be able to pay the bills. But she wanted something that was much more in keeping and aligned with her purpose, which she recognized was kind of working with animals. So she had a little bit more of the discovery piece done in terms of understanding where her interests and motivations and purpose was. But the practical challenge, so the third thing that's really difficult is just the practical challenges that people face. And that's things like managing with full-time work and managing with your finances and trying to fit in learning around all those different commitments you might have, juggling childcare, and sometimes not even just knowing the kind of process that you need to go through when you're applying for jobs nowadays.
I think what you just said there, gosh, you've just hit the nail on the head. It really struck a chord with me, because I remember a very long time ago when I graduated, it was at the back end of a recession, and the focus was on getting a job. And I was fortunate. I got a job straight out of university, but it was by no means a job that made my heart sing, by no means. And I knew within about 3 months of starting there that I wasn't happy. But to your absolute point, when I started to apply for other jobs, I limited myself to the straight and narrow of the job that I was already doing, because even though I had like my degree as background, that's what I thought I could do. And I think it's really interesting that, you know, very often when we enter the workplace, we don't enter, not very many of us enter by design. You know, few and far are the people that are training from school to enter a very, very specific career. So many of us end up almost accidentally. And I think the system, you know, the cultural narrative around work these days doesn't give us enough wiggle room to experiment and explore. And I'm really, you know, I'm really taken by the stories that you'd mentioned there about, you know, people that were brave enough to recognize and do the self-work to identify purpose or passion or some such. You know, what do you see people doing about, you know, when they arrive with you and they literally are blinkered into their own little furrow? What do people do about the challenge of finding out what your actual natural strengths are and so on?
So I'm sure that many of the things that we'll talk about now are familiar themes for some of the other sessions as well. I think the first thing that we try to encourage people to recognize is that, you know, the nature of careers have changed, and your example is exactly the example, really, which is, you know, even when we feel you know, that we've just fallen into work and fallen into a specific job and then just performing as well as we can at those things, there's still an expectation that we're doing it wrong. that somehow we've missed out, that those people who kind of figured out, they're going to do that specific career and they're going to do it for life, and somehow we've got it wrong. And actually, the reality is, if you look at the work that Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis do on the squiggly career, or if you think about the work that Heather McGowan does on the adaptation advantage, what we're really talking about is the fact that we still have a lens of kind of 20th century thinking as it relates to our jobs. So in that idea of having to pick a good major, and that you're going to jump up on an industry career ladder, and that's the kind of the paradigm that we're kind of transitioning away from, because now it's much more about being able to learn and adapt and create new value. And this is from Heather McGowan's model. Is a really great model for trying to help us understand it, which is, ultimately, we're moving towards this idea of a multi-industry career web, which is really confronting, because we're left with the expectation when we're going through our formative education that all the decisions I make now have a really massive impact on what I'm going to be doing when I'm 30 or 40 years old. Yeah. So that the first thing to kind of help people recognize is that it's okay, right? That it's okay to be in that place of not being too sure.
And can I just pause on that and just say that is so important, because let's just take a moment. I know that in the UK, as in the US, we are kind of preconditioned to know right from the get-go. And I look at my kids going through education at the moment, and they're being told age 13 or 14 to be thinking about what career they want to pursue, because the decisions they make now will affect them for the rest of their lives. And that is really paralyzing, actually. And I think that's a really important point that you raise, is it's okay.
Yeah. And there's a lot there, because work and identity have become very inextricably linked. And and somebody's mentioning there, like, where will you be in 5 years' time? There's a great example of the sorts of things that we have that expectation that we're going to know that. And alongside those things, we ask each other the question, so what do you do? And we have status and definitions of what people's value is based on the sort of work that they do. And all of these things are becoming, quite, we're beginning to have to lift the lid on some of those things, because actually we're having to find lots of adaptation in the sorts of work that we do. But the way that we kind of help people to then kind of move forward is much more kind of self introspection, and think about really how to deeply understand yourself. And so we start with helping people understand their natural talents and strengths. So we use things like Clifton Strengths Finder, and we help people identify their values using the VIA values. And then we also help people to recognize the skills that they've acquired across all the different types of work that they've done in the past. And this helps you to begin to look a little bit wider than your experience and knowledge, because that information, when we bring together that with lots of local labour market data, so all the job postings of all the new types of work that are being created where you live, we're able to help you see the connection between yourself and other types of work that you might be really suited to, that you don't know the name of. And so one of the kind of the fundamentals of what we're doing really is to help people reset to understand their real human value, and the kind of qualities that they have. It's a little bit like we talked about this before, Kat. We're kind of transitioning a little bit away from this idea of this kind of T-shaped person, where lots of skills that are at a relatively shallow level, and then really deep specialization in different areas. And so Matthew Daniel is a great idea, kind of metaphor here, which is actually it's a little bit like a tree. This idea of kind of durable skills being the roots that you've laid down, and those are things like the mindsets you have, the approach that you take, leadership, those types of kind of key human elements, to these kind of semi-durable skills, which are these, like the branches of the tree, which are the frameworks that you understand. So as an L&D professional, it might be the ADDIE model or some other ways of being able to kind of use process to be able to problem solve and work things through. And then the last of these perishable skills, almost like the leaves on the tree that fall at the end of each year, and needing to have to regrow those leaves, develop those new skills, which are essentially the kind of tools that we use, whether that's specific organizational knowledge or specific organizational tools that we use. So it's really important to be able to identify that level and where you're investing in yourself, because the things that create the most value are those durable skills, those elements that really keep you rooted and be able to help you grow new types of foliage every year. So the next thing that we work on is helping people to actually build develop confidence building habits. So one of the biggest things that will influence your performance in anything really is your confidence, and it's not a personality trait, it's a skill. So we've been working with an organization called Planet K2, who train Olympic medal winners to help them build the performance mindset to be able to succeed in stuff, and then taking those learnings of working with elite athletes and then being able to help individuals to understand how they can train in their minds using self-improvement methodologies to be able to perform as the best they can in the work they do. And so the sorts of things that can help to build confidence are things like task clarity, focusing on what you can control, recalling achievements regularly, knowing how you're going to use your strengths. So as you kind of go through that period of being able to deeply understand yourself, actually being able to kind of think about how you're going to deploy and use those strengths, and fundamentally being prepared and being as ready as you can be. And so by building those habits together with people, what it does is it helps them have those two parts of the building blocks that they need initially, the two challenges that they're facing, which is I don't know where to start. So we help people to understand what they, the inherent value they have and where they can fit. And then we help them build confidence around the value they have and putting together a bit of a plan. And the last thing that we help people do really is to kind of figure out those practical challenges. So, working out what you can afford, understanding your affordability is what you can afford to do in terms of your budgeting is really important. Figuring out how you're going to build in learning around your full-time job is really a challenge. But it's all of those elements that you need to have in place if you're going to succeed to be in learning new skills or moving into new types of careers. And fundamentally, you can't really do that unsupported. You've got to have someone with you.
And Dominic, I wanted to pop in for a second. A great question that really piggybacks what you're saying. I mean, part of your response did answer this, but we have a question here. I'm finding resistance in career shift right now, as there are so many qualified candidates in specific industry versus looking at someone with transferable skills. Can you talk about how to market yourself to be considered?
It's really, really challenging, definitely, particularly when you're coming up against people with that specific industry knowledge as well. I mean, obviously, one of the things that we know is that just applying directly into roles is always a little bit of a lottery as to whether or not you're going to stand out. So the sorts of things that you can consider can be, how do I better network and get into a place where I'm able to actually understand more about that organization, understand more about that role, maybe find people that you're able to, maybe through LinkedIn, get a little bit of another avenue in, so you're able to showcase yourself in a different way rather than the traditional kind of recruitment routes of application and those types of things. So, it isn't easy to stand out when you're coming up against specific industry challenges, but ultimately, there are some techniques that we're beginning to see do work, but they are hard. It's all hard work, unfortunately.
And I would add to that, I think another really important thing to note for anybody that is looking at this career transition and transferable skills, as job seekers, you are one side of that puzzle. And actually what I see time and time again is where recruitment and hiring has been massively transactionalized by finance directors who want to just keep a lid on recruitment costs. Recruiters very often are told to work to such a tight brief that they don't have almost like the skills capability themselves to think more broadly about skills transferability. So, there's a massive learning piece within the recruiting profession, I think, also. And I really liked what you had to say about, like the baseline, what I call the human skills. If we know that computers and algorithms and robots and what have you are going to take over the routine, repetitive parts of work, then our human skills, our soft skills, the bits and pieces that we're fundamentally hardwired to do well, those are going to be our standout skills. And I think what's really interesting is that they are inherent in nearly all of us. We're just perhaps not as well practiced as we might be, purely because the system within which we've operated hasn't rewarded us for those skills or hasn't thanked us for them. Mm-hmm. But I think that, thinking about what are my natural soft human skills, most of us are brilliant communicators when we're allowed the time and space to practice communicating. And most of us are deeply empathic also. And, these are massive skills, I think, for our future workplaces.
Totally right. Exactly. Yeah. And, ultimately, it is hard work, as I said before. And it's a little bit like expecting to run a marathon without having to do any of the groundwork, right? If we're doing small increments of understanding where we're at, things change in our lives. So, the things that are going to drive us will change through our lives as well. And being really open and accepting of that change is really, really important. Look, I think one of the other things to consider when we're trying to be really practical about the sorts of things you can do to try and stand out in an adjacent industry is to look at a skills-based resume. So not necessarily just focusing on the chronological work history you've got, but pulling out the achievements that you've had around specific uses of specific skills. Particularly when you're looking at the job profiles, trying to find and it's a little bit of a dark art, trying to find what people are really looking for and trying to make sure that you're tailoring that resume in such a way that really highlights what you've got to offer in terms of those durable, those semi-durable skills, because ultimately all that perishable stuff is stuff you're going to be able to learn really, really well, right? Because that's what we do. We're incredible learning machines, all of us, and the intent of what we have has to be that we're able to do that effectively throughout our lives.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. Yeah, absolutely. We are learning machines, 100%. I love that. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask really quickly before we break?
We do have one question in the Q&A we've got. Could you share your thoughts on the new CIPD L&D associate qualification?
Well, so interestingly, I am an L&D CIPD qualified person, so I think it's great. No, in seriousness, I as typically with qualifications, you get them and you kind of move on. So I'm not really across where we're at the moment in terms of whether they've made any substantial changes to the way that they've thought about that qualification. So I wouldn't want to comment on what was now maybe 14 years ago, unfortunately.
And one other comment in the chat is Becky's asking, so is learning a durable skill?
Absolutely.
Gosh, yes, 100%. And also, everybody that's listening, think about this, because I'm endlessly fascinated. We think about ourselves in accordance with, the sort of cultural surrounding in which we grew up. But if you really think about it and do a bit of a mind flip, we're learning new stuff every single day of our lives. Every single conversation we have with a new person, it's learning how to navigate your social capabilities and so on. So 100% learning is a durable skill, and we're doing it by default, even when we don't even know we're doing it.
Well said, Kat. Well, Dominic and Catherine, so grateful to have you and your time today. Thank you for being with us. I know that the 40 plus people who sat in have amazing things that they can go back and continue to talk about. So thank you. Reminder to everyone, this session will be available on our YouTube channel for L&D Cares, and we really hope that you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Have a great time. See you.
Awesome job, you guys.